Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of the largest asylums in the world and some of the horrific things that happen there. If that sounds interesting to you, stick around because I'm about to get into it. But before I do, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe because it really does help me out a lot and it is always greatly appreciated. And with that being said, let's get into today's story. Milledgeville is the largest asylum in the world, and it is located in Georgia. It was constructed in 1837 and would one day have a cemetery of over 25,000 people, most in unmarked graves. Tillman B. was the first patient to reside in Milledgeville. He was considered a threat to himself and to others, so he had to walk from his home alongside a horse-drawn carriage that his family rode in because he wasn't allowed to ride with them. He was admitted in December and passed away before summer. That was about 6 months after being admitted into Milledgeville, and he had died from what they called maniacal exhaustion. At its peak, Milledgeville would house over 13,000 patients. Back then, before we knew much about mental illness, people were admitted for an assortment of reasons, and a lot of which had nothing to do with being mentally ill. Of the first 50 patients, 29 died without leaving. Records list causes of death was dysphoria, chronic diarrhea, convulsions, general paralysis. Just 8 of the first 50 patients were pronounced cured. A large number of patients that were housed in these asylums were women. Husbands could go ahead and have wives committed for whatever reason they chose because back then, women had no rights. Residents went from children all the way up to the criminally insane. Some people had disabilities and others were addicted to drugs and alcohol. Back then, parents would threaten their kids that they would take them to Milledgeville if they didn't do what they were told, and that was a terrifying threat, and kids would fall into line quickly because back in those days, the asylum was considered a death sentence. Dr. Thomas Green was the first chief physician, and Dr. Powell was the second. Dr. Powell would go on to be known as the father of mental health reform, and after Dr. Powell left, the asylum would go into a downward spiral from which it would never recover. 200 buildings and over 2,000 acres housed over 13,000 patients. During the Depression, most Georgia residents worked at the asylum because everyone was desperate for income. They needed money to survive. It was so much so that they had to put a cap that only 2 people per household could work at the asylum at one time. In 1937, Georgia passed a law of involuntary sterilizations on the patients of Milledgeville, and this would carry on until 1963. During that time, countless horrors went on behind closed doors. Electric shock, lobotomies, patients left in straitjackets for days on end, patients locked in cages. Also back then, insulin was being used to treat schizophrenia and manic depression. And a former patient named Alma claimed that she had received electric shock therapy 8 times during her stay. Electric shock had become so prevalent at the asylum that the people who worked there and the patients weren't certain if it was in place to cure them or to punish them. In 1950, the asylum had outgrew its resources, averaging 1 doctor per 100 patients. Many who had once been patients and were considered cured began working alongside staff to treat the new onslaught of patients, and thousands of people died. Jack Nielsen, a reporter for Atlantic Constitution, brought the dark side of the asylum to light, uncovering the atrocities being committed there. Nurses were performing major surgeries without supervision. Patients were being left unchecked for long periods of time. Children were being locked away. There were 48 doctors on staff, and not one of them was a psychiatrist. So this was the beginning of the end for the asylum, and in the 1960s, new psychiatric drugs became available to treat these patients so that many of them were able to carry on with normal, healthier lives. Georgia governors Jimmy Everest and Carl Sanders began releasing patients from the asylum and sending them to other facilities, such as community clinics and residential hospitals. Those with developmental disabilities were sent to group homes. Unfortunately, these changes brought about new problems such as homelessness and drug addiction. In 1999, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Georgia would give its residents, those with mental disabilities, the right to choose whether they wanted to go to community clinics or be institutionalized. Milledgeville to date has over 20,000 graves on its vast grounds, and many of them are unmarked. Patients there who passed away with no family to claim them or give them a proper burial were given markers with serial numbers so that they could be identified at a later date. Those markers were uprooted later on, at least most of them were, to make it easier for the caretakers to take care of the grounds. that left it nearly impossible for anyone coming forward to find anyone from their family that had been put in that asylum, because those markers had been piled up in the back parts of the property. So it stands to reason that if you were to set foot on Milledgeville and walk around, you may well be standing on someone's grave. After the asylum was vacated, it was turned into then a prison and also had other medical facilities on the grounds. You can visit the grounds, but you are not permitted to walk into the buildings and wander around without any attendance. There are tours that you can go ahead and take if you wanted to visit Milledgeville today. I came across this story on TikTok and I was really curious. It was just a brief excerpt, so I decided to go ahead and further my research, and I found all kinds of stories on this place that I was able to put together and share with you guys today. And it really is a tragedy, because back then we knew so little about mental health, and there were so many people that were committed to this place that weren't really mentally ill at all. I mean, we're still learning about the mind to this day. It is a mystery. So I just find it a terrible tragedy that so many people lost their lives while they were committed at this hospital, and so few people came out of it what they would consider cured. So I wanted to go ahead and sit down and share the story with you guys today. I also was able to find some reviews, people who had gone there to visit, would-be Ghostbusters or history buffs and whatnot, and it has really great reviews. People said that they really enjoyed their time there. But I doubt the same could be said for those who once resided. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. That is today's story. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, stay alert.